Hello and welcome to our show. We are live streaming from Beijing. I'm Tu Yun. Joining our discussion today are two gentlemen. Ivo Ganchev, from Adjunct Professor of Global Leadership, Beijing Union University. And as usual, Xu Qinduo, Senior Fellow at the Beijing-based think tank Pangoal Institution. Well, the latest interaction between President Xi Jinping and Starbucks Chairman Emeritus Howard Schultz has attracted worldwide attention, right? So upon learning this news, my first question is, why Starbucks? Because we know there are a lot of U.S. companies present in China, like Ford, General Motors, etc., you name it. Why it's a coffee chain franchise? Why it's Starbucks? And President Xi replied to him.
Of course. Well, thanks very much for the invitation. And to your question, why Starbucks? Of course, there are a lot of Western companies that have developed quite well here in the Chinese market, but Starbucks is really a standout case in terms of the speed and scale of their development. They've opened over 4,000, it's approaching 5,000 stores in China already, and they've also integrated well in terms of partnerships with local companies such as Alipay, such as Ele.me in Beijing specifically, and at the moment they're expanding at a remarkable scale. They're opening almost more than one new store a day in China, and this is set to continue for the next few years. So Starbucks in this way is a representative case of business success of an American company in China.
I understand its rapid growth in this country, but on the other hand, we've got also McDonald's, right, KFC, but why it's like Mr. Schultz? Is it because he is promoting this book? I understand he actually sent this book with the letter to President Xi Qinduo. Your take on this?
Part of the purpose, probably. I would say he's a business person, Mr. Schultz. So it's a smart decision, right? If the president wrote back and, everybody knows there's a lot of coverage of this book. I mean, it sells, right? It's a Chinese version over there. A larger picture, this is really a story about a coffee, right? Not Starbucks, but anyway, coffee here. It sells coffee. It's we have a new administration in Washington, D.C., and everybody's watching China-U.S. relationship, and under that big picture, and here we're talking about a coffee, talking about a Starbucks. I totally agree with you. There's a great potential. The Chinese market, for example, their plan for 2021 is another 600 stores in China, the largest increase of the number of new stores beyond North America around the world. So obviously, the China market is key to the expansion, to the growth of Starbucks as a company here. And I think there's every reason probably for Mr. Schultz to do something to highlight their confidence in the China market and their story with China, beyond America here. So we have this letter, and I think also from President Xi's point of view, obviously he loves to see more investment in China. He's working for the Chinese interests. We are continuing to open up the market to welcome companies like Starbucks, other U.S. companies, other companies from other countries.
Right.
Yeah, I mean there are opportunities. China welcomes every investor from other parts of the world.
And talking about President Xi's reply, how unusual is it? I know that President Xi used to send letters back to elementary school or high school students in the States, but to a businessman, have you ever seen that before?
Well, it's, I would not necessarily use the word unusual. I would say it's not common, but there have been similar instances when we talk about sending letters back to people who are very much both engaged in business and in the American community and in terms of, for instance, philanthropic work. So at the beginning of the pandemic, for example, when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation made a pledge to contribute a large donation towards towards addressing the COVID pandemic, they received, for instance, a letter from President Xi as well. And in the past 6 months, we've seen a couple of examples in which President Xi engages very actively with the business community. For instance, he wrote a letter to the Global CEO Council recently. He also spoke to the APEC CEO dialogue as well. That's one of the events that I also commented on here with CRI and the Beijing Hour.
Right.
So he does engage actively in conversation with the global business community, and I think this is an excellent move on his part, because the business community does need to understand more about China's commitments and its openness to the world, because in the world that we live in right now, there are not necessarily that many places that are as open and as welcoming to foreign investment and foreign business as China is right now. And in terms of Mr. Schultz in particular, he's not just a businessman, but he's a public figure in the U.S.
Right.
When he does speak on CNN, for instance, he doesn't simply address issues relating to Starbucks. He also speaks about U.S. jobs, the U.S. economy, for instance, certain measures that he would advocate in terms of helping the U.S. business community more broadly. So he is also not just a businessman, but a business leader and somebody with a certain social impact who's concerned about American society and about U.S.-China relations as well.
Qinduo, when you were based in Washington, have you had any interaction like that with U.S. business people?
A lot of interaction with coffee,
right?
yeah.
A lot.
Starbucks. Yes. Can I add,
Sure.
something to what you have said? I think, Mr. Schultz was considering actually to be one of the candidates for 2020 general election
Right.
over there. So obviously he's a public figure. He's beyond Starbucks. When he speaks not only for his own company, but also the U.S. business community as someone from the U.S. To talk about the U.S. The future of the nation. He's concerned with that. And he's concerned with the relationship between the two countries. His ideas, I think he found a lot of audience here. A lot of people agree with him. That is, the two countries, we needed to work with each other. He knows there are differences between the two countries, the two cultures, the two peoples, but also there's a lot in common. For example, both the Chinese, both the Americans, we stress very much about the family values, stress very much about the education, and work hard. When people look at the business opportunities, young people like to, want to make it. It's the same for people. We have our work, we have our concern. So he understands more about this relationship as a business person, because he spends obviously a lot of time in China, with his business here. And also if you look at President Xi, he himself actually conducts this. It's like a public diplomacy.
Right.
Personally, I see he. By doing, he's showing an example of engaging with people from other countries to increase the understanding, to increase the confidence in each other, to produce a good outcome, let's say, for both sides. Back a few years back, I think, still in the Obama administration, when President Obama was complaining about China as a free rider, he said the U.S. provides the security. China was doing the business, but China was not contributing enough to the global security. The two countries obviously have different system. They have a different understanding of the world, and then later, I think the presidency said that, China is open. We welcome other countries to take a free ride with the development over there. He's very active. Presidency is very active to the global situation, to the business, to the concern from the public. That's a good thing, right? And direct communication between business leaders, between Chinese leaders, Chinese public with Chinese leaders, is a good diplomacy. Whether you call it, it's not a summit diplomacy between national leaders,
right.
but it's a good diplomacy between national leader and business people and the public.
What we call people to people, right?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And to the timing of their interaction, Ivo, to any extent, does he, Mr. Schultz serve an hero to the new Biden administration when it comes to the new U.S. government's new policy?
Well, to a certain extent, in terms of the way that the American political system works, every 4 years we're in a place where the new incoming administration can't necessarily conduct this direct dialogue for a few months with other countries at the official level, and this is exactly the right time when people like Mr. Schultz and others who are publicly engaged are well positioned to indicate the future direction of the relationship between the U.S. and other countries, for instance, with China in this particular case. In terms of looking at the way that people like Mr. Schultz choose the timing and communicate with Chinese leaders and the Chinese government, one thing that I like to say sometimes is that in terms of the Chinese government system and the U.S. corporate system, there is one thing that they have in common, and it is continuity. Because the U.S. government system is in many ways good for its own country, but one thing that it sometimes lacks a little bit is continuity from one government to the next, because in terms of foreign policy, as we saw with Obama and then Trump, and now the Biden administration, foreign policy can sometimes take a swift turn in one direction or the other, whereas the corporate world in the U.S. has these large companies that are very stable and that serve also a public role in terms of providing employment, that are very much engaged with U.S. society, and that also speak for the U.S. people as well. So this is the right time in which somebody like Mr. Schultz can come in and assist the future direction of the U.S.-China relations.
And talking about the continuity, I understand Mr. Schultz, over the past 2 decades, has been traveling between China and the U.S. very frequently, visiting the employees in China, of Starbucks, of course. And Qinduo, how do you think he would evaluate or value the family values actually shared by both Americans and Chinese people?
Interesting you mentioned that, if you're familiar with the stories of Starbucks or Mr. Schultz, his childhood, he has a rough childhood over there, and he obviously his story, I think, is inspiring for a lot of Chinese young people. That is, you live in poverty, you have a hard time when you were very young, but still you can make it as long as you stress, you work hard in your education, and you work hard after your graduation over there. Even during this university time, he sold his own blood to pay the tuition over there. So I think a lot of people would be touched by that, working so hard. A lot of Chinese people would find that that's in common to their individual life. Oh, I had a hard time, I struggled a little bit, I struggled very much, but I make it as long as I work hard. So in that sense, I think there's a lot in common. And also, if you look at China's poverty alleviation program, for example, President Xi Jinping paid a personal attention to that. If you look at the past 8 to 10 years, one of the 3 priorities every year is about poverty alleviation and President Xi Jinping. So he, when he was in the U.S., I think 2015, that time, as vice president, he was received by Vice President Biden at that time. He talked about the story when he was young in Shanxi, as the young people in the village at that time, there's no opportunity for them to even have enough meat, to have a taste of meat, quite often it's just impossible. He worked hard, but still he couldn't do that. And so he had that in his life, in his memory. That's why he stressed so much, like no one would be left behind in China. We will make sure everyone is out of absolute poverty. So we did it 2020, and of course that drive will continue. I think that story also has something in common with Ms. Schultz's childhood, poverty, and then you improve upon that, you work hard, you can make it, you can change your life for much, much better.
And I understand his father is a veteran, right, fighting in the Second World War, and they're from a Jewish family. I think that says a lot about his background and why he cherished that kind of spirit. Young people from the very root of society fighting up to a very cherished or you could say a higher position in the society, right?
Yeah, that's true. This book in particular, actually, according to the way that I read a little bit of it,
right.
But not all of it, I admit, but I did read about the first half. And if you look at the preface of the book, there's only a couple of sentences that I actually brought along, and I just want to sort of share them with their audience.
Sure.
And Mr. Schultz writes, these pages are less about Starbucks and my childhood than about the place in which we were both born, the United States of America. The intertwined narratives of my youth and my final years at Starbucks tell a bigger story. It's a story about reinvention and renewal, about possibilities, about the power of people to change the lives of others as well as their own. It's a story about what we can do for ourselves and for each other, as well as the responsibility we all have to reimagine our shared future, and reimagine we must. So in this sense, the way that I understand this particular passage and the way that Mr. Schultz sort of framed this book is that he doesn't want to simply tell the story of Starbucks. He's actually written books in the past that share, introduce and present the way that he approaches his corporate affairs and the way that he manages Starbucks and the corporate values and all of that. Right. He's actually written before about this. This particular book focuses more on his personal story and how it relates to the American community. And in this sense, the fact that he sent this particular book along with his letter to President Xi, I think is also a sign, it's a symbol of what he wants to express. He wants to share with President Xi the American story, and he wants to emphasize the fact that Chinese people and American people, as Xu Qinduo said, have a lot in common. And if you talk to somebody in the U.S. who's, for instance, the owner of a company, and somebody in China who's the owner of a company, I think you'll find that they're a lot more similar than different, even though they're from two completely different places in the world and two different backgrounds and languages. So in this sense, this gesture by Mr. Schultz, the way that I understand it, is a lot about seeking similarities between the two different peoples and trying to share both his broader concerns and also his personal story and the personal story of many more Americans who also have shared concerns with him and who want to work towards a future of shared benefit.
Yeah, I can see he's trying to bridge the gap between the two countries, right? Especially.
Right. I mean, given what happened over the past 4 years, the relationship has been rocky. A lot of people are concerned about that. This is, let's say, one of the most important bilateral relationship in the world, if not the most important. As the two powers, big powers, China and the U.S., they, have this responsibility on their shoulder, not only for their own people, but also for the entire world. Right. For example, climate change. We need the participation, we need the contribution from China, from the United States. If with the absence of China or with the absence of the U.S., the whole world, we just can't move forward. We are not able to deal with this crisis, which affects every individual in this planet. So that's why when we, the word shared future, this is a good choice. A choice of word. I think this is the key issue challenging the entire mankind here, not only China, but also the US. And another issue would be like a global pandemic. We need to work together. I still remember when it was like Obama administration, China and the US, the scientists from the two countries worked side by side and the same roof in the same lab in Sierra Leone to deal with Ebola. You see, as long as you have this trust, these two countries can work together and so much they can achieve. But unfortunately, during this pandemic, we see these two countries, particularly the Trump administration, the first, of course, it's a different story. It's another story,
Right.
We see this what happened over there. And with this new administration in Washington D.C., there's a lot of hope. I would say, the two countries can resume their cooperation, talk to each other to ensure peace, stability, opportunities, not only for their own peoples, but also for the rest of the world, because they are too powerful, these two countries. If they don't get along with each other, the rest of the world will suffer from this instability, from this chaos, from this confrontation. Not to mention something worse than that, say, if there's a military conflict, we just can't afford to have that. Fortunately, now we have adults who grew up now in Washington, D.C. It's a different administration. Maybe there will be new opportunities for the two sides to start again, if not a reset, at least not let the relationship get worse than the current status. How about that? Yeah.
Right. I understand Mr. Schultz has said a lot of things, good things about China, right? He said he described himself as an American who respects Chinese people and his culture, and he obviously explicitly stated that he thinks China is not an enemy, but he would call it a fierce competitor, which he also said he understood that it's quite controversial in the United States for now. So under this circumstance, do you think, well, his expressive, or you would say love for China, would trigger any, controversial or any negative impact on himself or even on his franchise? We understand his franchise obviously got attacked in Hong Kong last year during the riots, right?
In a sense, yes. It's always like this. If you are a public figure, if you are commenting on something controversial a little bit, or there's no firm conclusion of their, how do you define the relationship between China and the U.S.? How do you see China in the U.S. or how do you see U.S. in China? I would say this is more like a unilateral, frankly speaking. If you look at China-U.S. relationship, China is a rising country. U.S. is the status quo power, superpower, the only superpower. There is a concern China is rising rapidly, is approaching my status. Somehow people feel this, have this fear that whether China will catch up with the United States or whether China will replace the United States in the global dominant position over there. So the two countries need to work out their concerns, their anxieties. In a sense, the U.S. is playing defense. All those measures. I agree with Catherine Tai, the new trade representative of the Biden administration, when she talked about all those tariffs imposed by the Trump government on the Chinese goods over there. That's actually defensive measures, not aggressive. On the surface, it looks like aggressive because I'm imposing tariffs on your products, but actually it's a passive, it's a defensive over there. But I think it reflects this concern, this fear, and plus to that, these two countries, they have different culture and different tradition, and different backgrounds in terms of how organizing their society. U.S. has the U.S. way, they call it U.S. style of democracy, to organize their society, the resources to develop their country. For China, they have a different system. We have a different tradition, which has been there thousands of years. And some people, at least originally, they want to change China to be more like America or Western-style democracy. And then they say, we were not able to change China, and then they become disappointed. I think probably they should not try in the first place, because China is so different. I'm not sure any country can change China unless the Chinese people want to change it, right? Because it's deeply entrenched in our blood, in our DNA. We have our own problems. We have our own shortbacks. The weakness in our culture, our vulnerability even. it's up to the Chinese people to see that, to fix that, to move forward. It's really, look at the past 40 plus years. China is one of the most successful country, and largely because of the government. They have a wise policy, they have a long-term view, they have enforced all those measures, all those policies effectively. That's why we are here today, the second largest economy in the world. So that's why the Chinese government and the Communist Party of China enjoyed approval rate basically every year above 90%. That's not a figure I give, that's a figure from a study of 13 years by Harvard University. There's an institution over there. They have been doing this study over the past 10 plus years. That's their conclusion. They talk to different people here in China. And so I think we need to be realistic when we look at the two countries. They are different. And we have to respect the differences. I think Mr. Schultz, when he says he respects the Chinese people, that he means like us. We respect American people. We respect American culture, American tradition, American system. But we're different. That's the reality. And we needed to build our relationship based on that kind of reality.
So, given this vast market here in China, is it a bullet, if you will, worth fighting for Mr. Schultz?
Well, now that you've put it that way. But look, the Chinese market is indeed huge, it's tremendous. It is also the fastest growing market in the world. Right. So when you think about it from a larger historical perspective, one of the reasons why in the past Western countries enjoyed fast economic growth and dominance in terms of the world economy is because we had a difference in terms of technology and in terms of the spread of knowledge. And in the past 100 years or so, this has been changing on a worldwide scale. So now with the internet, with communications, with new technology, we can travel much faster, and information also travels much faster. So what becomes one of the most important factors now is population and the size of a market. So in this particular new stage of world history that we are at, China is tremendously important because China has one fantastic asset, and that's its people. Because now all of these people are potentially both consumers and entrepreneurs and business partners. And from this perspective, China is a remarkable market and also potential partner that I think all companies should consider, especially somebody like Starbucks. But Mr. Schultz and also everybody else that does business, I think also as long as they engage with China, they tend to respect China and its people very much at a very genuine level. Because if you do business and you come here and you visit people in all of the Chinese provinces and you see how everybody works extremely hard to achieve what China has done in the past 40 years, I think it's impossible not to respect China. I think if you don't respect China, then there's something wrong with you, frankly. So
mutual respect.
Yeah,
right?
and of course, Chinese people have a great tradition of the way that they conduct themselves in terms of diplomacy, in terms of international negotiations, and they do show tremendous respect to other countries as well. So I think that what Mr. Schultz is doing and the way that President Xi has responded is commendable on so many levels. So I would say that I very much applaud what they do in their initiative, and I hope to see more of this in the future, more of this engagement, more of this type of, if you wish, public diplomacy.
To what extent do you think Mr. Schultz represents U.S. business people here in China who have operations here? I understand Mr. Schultz likes sending letters or emails very much. When he endorsed Joe Biden, he also sent an email to him. So how many American business people would like to send letters to President Xi here?
Well, I'd say he represents actually a lot of business people even not just American business people, he represents a lot of business people in general. As we sort of mentioned before, people that have the same type of occupation or a similar type of mindset or similar goals, there's a lot of similarities between them. For instance, in my personal experience, I also work with European companies that engage with China. And I would say that when you talk to an American CEO and a European CEO, they do tend to have fairly similar goals and mindsets. And from that perspective, I would say that Mr. Schultz represents both American and other businesses.
Absolutely. I think business people are practical, and also they understand. When you're in Rome, do as the Romans do, right?
Right.
Like the Chinese investors, when they go to the European Union countries over there, for example, usually they have they stress very much about this environmental protection. They have more advanced regulations, actually more detailed regulations in terms of projects. So you have to respect that. You have to follow the rules. It's a bit different. It's more advanced probably than here in China. You need to follow that. You need to respect that's the different practices, in different parts of the world. It's a similar, and also I think business people, they understand. In particular, for example, business operations here in China from the United States, they understand that this is a big market. There's great potential over there. Just like Chinese investors doing investment now, very rare probably because of the situation. In the United States, Chinese business people understand, US market, there's a big market, we can't just miss out. If you want to, make your company a global one, you just can't, ignore the market over there. At the same time, they understand that there are problems between the two countries, the differences, there's tension, in particular over the past 4 years, there's effort from Washington to decouple from China. But I think for business people, they would say this is just impractical. To decouple for what? Because decoupling would make them suffer. In the worst situation, they would say, I would be forced to stay out of the China market. For the Chinese company, I would be forced to stay out of the US market. It's a huge, huge loss for business opportunities, and also for the opportunity to create jobs for both peoples, or paying the revenues for both governments. It's a bit silly, I would say. That's why we stress it is a win-win situation. It is a win for Starbucks. It's a win for China. It's a win for the U.S. companies, for European companies here in China, and also it's a win for the Chinese government, for China as a country. Similarly, Chinese investment will create opportunities for American people, for European Union countries, if they have this investment over there. Of course, it's good for Chinese investors, for Chinese companies. Right. I mean, it's like trade. When we are doing trade, like I purchase a cup of coffee from you, you get my money, I get your coffee. It's equal. It's voluntary. Nobody forced me to purchase coffee from you, or nobody forced you to do business with me. So trade itself is a win-win. I think people need to understand that.
It's quite simple. Just don't politicize
it. Yeah, it's simple. It's like common sense. It's good for both sides. So that's why the decoupling efforts is hard to understand. It's a bit silly, I would say. And also good to see that it failed.
Right. And President Joe Biden was just sworn in a couple of hours ago. And do you expect the new U.S. government to change their policy? Obviously, everybody is expecting that, right? A change in the U.S. policy towards China. But do you expect to be good enough to satisfy business people like Mr. Schultz?
Well, whether it can satisfy the business community completely is, of course, always a difficult question, right? Because especially the way that the American and Western societies are set up, as well as their political systems, is always that the business community tends to advocate for what they would like, and then the government sees how much they can do, and it's always a bit of a push and pull. So this is a natural process there. But what is important here is that everybody's much more hopeful in the business community. Right. The new team of the Biden administration is very qualified. They're very professional in what they do. And I have to say that this is a very pronounced change compared to the past 4 years under the Trump administration. So when you look at the upcoming engagements between the Biden administration and the Chinese administration, I would personally watch for a number of markers here. So one marker is whether the U.S. and China can restore cooperation in areas where they have a clear common interest. There are lots of what I like to call many low-hanging fruit that they can just pick. So in terms of the response to the pandemic, in terms of arms control, in terms of certain measures in education, like the Fulbright scholarship measures that the U.S. took, which I thought were outrageous in the way that they did that. And these things influenced the lives of people that have their own careers and ambitions and families, and politicizing that, I thought, was a tremendous mistake. And I think that these things are the first marker that we have to watch for in terms of signs of an amelioration between China and the U.S. In their diplomatic relations. Now, the second sign that I would watch for is whether the two sides can restore a sense of professionalism. When it comes to dialogue and diplomacy and foreign policy, I think that both sides, and the U.S. in particular here, has to understand and demonstrate that pursuing direct dialogue is not a form of capitulation. If there is no dialogue, then a lot of the other issues that they have can't really get discussed or addressed or solved. The fact that you're talking to somebody does not necessarily mean that you can't defend your position in a civil and reasoned manner and look for a common solution, or at least a partial solution, even if certain issues are difficult to solve completely. So I think that the second sign that I would watch for is whether the U.S. and China can deal as dispassionate and professional great powers, which they should be, and I believe they are. And the third sign that I would watch for is interactions in terms of dialogue between the Chinese and the U.S. Government. Now, of course, given the issues that the Biden administration has to be concerned with domestically at the moment, we've seen the recent incidents in the U.S., the polarization of their society. Of course, this is something that might not happen immediately, but this is something that we hope very much can happen in the next few months. So these three signs, I believe, will also come in the order that I outlined them more or less. So the first two that we'll see, I hope, will be having the China and the U.S. restore cooperation in areas of common interest, and then show a greater sense of professionalism. And then finally, when the political dialogue gets restored, I believe that this will provide a fantastic platform for a return to normality, which is what we used to have and we hope to get back to.
Right. Qinduo, are you as optimistic as Ivo?
I mean, obviously, more optimistic than the last 4 years, right? So
That's true.
I don't expect, a further deterioration of the relationship between the two countries. I don't expect more, say, punitive measures or sanctions or any moves, damaging the relationship from Washington, probably, because it's already, bad enough. It's sad to see such an important relationship being damaged in a wanton way by the Trump regime. It's just unimaginable. When we talk about this, because you have this big picture of the global community, we are talking about the potential dangers, tremendous danger, if these two countries can't get along with each other. If they get a military conflict, this region, this entire world will not be peaceful. So there's a huge stake, huge at stake. That there's a problem. Let's see, I would say probably it's not getting worse, at least for now. And secondly, the key issue for the two countries, for the decision makers from the two sides, is really to strike a balance between competition and cooperation. I think both sides understand that we need to cooperate on climate change, on pandemic, and we need to do something, as you mentioned, low-hanging fruit. For example, the visa issue for Chinese scholars, for Chinese students. make it normal. It's not improving, not some preferential policies for Chinese students, but at least make it a normal practice, just like another country. For example, there are 370,000 Chinese students studying in the U.S. or registered in the United States 2019. 1/3 of the international students in the U.S. That's critical to the Chinese side, Chinese families, but also to the many U.S. universities which rely a lot on the international students' tuition to survive. And like this, the scholarship over there you mentioned, that I mean, this just does not make sense, right? to suspend that kind of practice, it's hard to understand. Probably we need to resume on that too, that front, because it's much less controversial. Or the even this, consulate general, Chinese consulate in Houston, or U.S. consulate in Chengdu. These crazy moves over there. Let's change that a little bit. I think competition side, obviously there's competition, technology, business, geopolitical. But what about the positive competition? Like let's the two governments, the two countries compete on better governance, on welfare, on opportunities for their own people, on building a better society, a safe society for their own people. How about that? Which governments can manage their economy better, provides more opportunities for their young people, less burden for college students, for the poor families. How about that? Instead of competing globally, like, oh, I want to have a larger influence here, or I can't let you to have more influence there. It's a bit silly for me. I think it's, if we have managed to have a positive competition, both sides will benefit from that kind of competition.
Right.
Let's say which country is more innovative, which country is developing faster in terms of technology, in terms of providing this necessary technology, like a new medicine, bad welfare for the people. That's good for their own people, good for the whole world.
Right, creating opportunities for people like young Howard Schultz, right?
Exactly.
And last but not least, I'm not a coffee fan. I'm not a coffee people. I'm on the tea side. But what are your views on Starbucks prospects, let's say, over the next decade?
I would say myself, I'm quite bullish on Starbucks. I think that Starbucks understands that expansion and competition is something that you have to approach as a race to the top, not as a race to the bottom. And as a business organization, they understand that it is vital to engage with China, to develop their business in China, even to compete with Chinese companies here. And this is something that I believe they welcome very much. As we mentioned before, they've had a tremendous growth, and even just at the peak of the pandemic, they doubled down on their commitment to develop in China. They're investing $130 million in a large-scale roastery here in China. This is something that is also linked to their project for a coffee innovation park. It's also something that we can see in their shops here, where their roastery is sort of reflected in the high-quality coffee that they provide. And I think that Starbucks' expansion and operation in China is actually something that's also good for China and for its economy and for local companies as well. So, for instance, I'll give you a specific example in terms of the way that Starbucks paved the way for Chinese companies and carved a niche that now they can also operate into. After Starbucks began to expand quite rapidly, they started having Chinese competitors like Luckin Coffee, for example, that emerged. And how the competition there worked out was Starbucks was at the more premium end of the market, and then what Luckin Coffee did was they priced their coffee let's say about 10 RMB lower, and they started looking more into deliveries rather than selling coffee on site within their shops. And this is something that allowed a new section of the market to experience coffee, to get familiar with coffee, and it paved the way for also more Chinese companies and more local coffee shops to be open here as well. Another aspect in which I believe China is also benefiting from the expansion of Starbucks here is, for instance, the development of Yunnan coffee, which I believe we're drinking right now. So this is something that that also has to do with the general expansion of coffee culture, and also with the specific operations of Starbucks. They work with some of the local producers in Yunnan, and as far as I know, Howard Schultz himself is quite keen on developing certain brews that come from this Chinese province. So I believe that if you look at market expansion and at competition in a positive way, you can see that it generates growth, that it stimulates ambition, that it carves out new niches in the market, and that it also contributes to more opportunities for each and every person, both in terms of employment and the people that work within these companies, and in terms of the consumers that tend to experience a greater variety of high quality products.
I'm sure Mr. Schultz wouldn't mind fair competition as long as it's fair and it's good, right?
It's good. I mean, competition is always good. If you look at the service introduced by Starbucks, I think last year or the year before, the delivery service, it's actually, you can say, it's copying from its competitor Luckin, right? Of course, Luckin copied probably Starbucks in the first place. So, but anyway, it's the competition which forces the company to provide better service, to be more competitive, to be more attractive, let's say. And also, you know, I think you have to give Starbucks, I mean, I'm not sure whether it's a credit or not. It's you know, the coffee culture here. China traditionally is a tea country, right? We drink tea. We used to drink tea, but now more and more young people are getting used to coffee here. And then you see there are more opportunities not only for Starbucks but also for other countries. For example, Rwanda or Kenya. The coffee beans, they are so popular here in China. It's unbelievable. There's an event last year, last year I believe, the ambassador was introducing their coffee to China from Rwanda. I think it's like a Double 11, that kind of event, a singles event. Instantly, almost within an hour, all the coffee beans they prepared, a few minutes, it's gone. I mean, this market is huge, just beyond your belief, probably, your understanding. I mean, 1.4 billion people, expanding middle class, 400 million, it's growing. And it will be the largest middle class in the world. And I just see, I mean, any business, I can't afford to miss out to the Chinese market. And so, you know, I was once, you know, couple of years ago writing a opinion piece about the coffee market here. I was noticing there's a third-tier city. You know, we are talking about way beyond Beijing, Shanghai, or Guangzhou. You never know the name probably of this small
I heard
city.
It's already enforced with fifth-tier cities.
Yeah,
right?
and when the first Starbucks coffee shop was there, there was a long line outside the shop. The young people are keen, you know, to have a taste. Oh, we have Starbucks in our neighborhood. You know, they welcome the presence. You know, where can you expect that? There's no you know, like opposition to globalization in China. Very different actually from that in many countries. In developed countries in particular, people are concerned with the globalization. They say, oh, there's a side effect, there's a problem with globalization, with this business expansion. But here in China, we're still in the stage of people embracing the business, people welcoming the business, people are welcoming the brand from other countries, or investment from other countries. So I would say China market is and compared to you know, mature market, probably is more welcome destination for investment.
Right, a land of promise, right?
Yeah, like that.
Right. All right, with that, we've come to the end of today's live stream. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time. Thank you to you both.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
I mean,
Fantastic.
good time to talk about China.